25 years, a significant rise in income per capita in many parts of the developing world. Okay, so let's talk about exam number 3. So first, Friday, December 17th, 7 to 10 p.m. We're last. They always save the best for last, or the last for the best. Either that or we're being punished. I'm not sure which. Somehow it feels more like punishment to me, but that's just the way it is. We're going to be in 105 Stanley Hall. Now, if you had looked earlier, when they first posted the exam schedule, you would have seen that we were originally supposed to be in Hearst Gymnasium. Now, I don't know if you've ever taken an exam in Hearst Gym in December at night, but if you have, there are 3 things that you will notice. It's cold, it's drafty, and the lighting really sucks. So I banged the table very, very loudly to say, come on, guys, this is the last exam on campus. You can't tell me you don't have large rooms somewhere on campus that you can put us into. So anyway, we've been moved to 105 Stanley, so that's where we'll be. It's a room that holds 400 students, so we won't have alternate seating, but it's bigger than this room. And anyway, it will be drier, it will not be drafty, and it is much better lit. Coverage. So the coverage is essentially the material that we've covered since exam 2, which are essentially parts of chapters 8 and 9 and all of chapters 10 and 11. The format of the exam will be very similar to what we've seen before. There will be 10 multiple choice questions, none of which I have written yet. And there will either be 2 free response questions about the same length that we've seen on earlier exams, or maybe 3 slightly shorter, so it shouldn't take you any longer to actually do them. But we've got a variety of different topics that we've done this time that we might have 3. As you know, I'll bring you a complete exam packet with scratch paper, so you don't need to bring anything, no books, notes, electronic devices. Bring your pens and pencils, bring a straight edge. If you want to use a straight edge, bring aspirin if you feel like you're going to need aspirin. So what have we done? So in these last 5 weeks or so, we've done 4 basic topics. What kind of government policies can we have for pushing exports? By the way, I see some of you typing madly. These slides are posted, so if you need to take notes, that's okay, but this part's already posted. So we talked about pushing exports, trade policy in developing countries, multilateral and preferential trade agreements, and international trade labor standards in the environment. So within the context of pushing exports, we also have 4 topics. So 4 on 4. Subsidies, taxes, high technology exports, and strategic trade theory. So the easy thing about export subsidies, we're going to expand the volume of trade. We're going to raise the domestic price of the product. There will be a redistribution of income away from consumers to producers. So there will also be a change in domestic economic welfare. If we're a large country, that also means that we're going to change the world price. And if we change the world price, there will also be an effect on foreign economic welfare. So notice that most of that, except for the directional movements, is very similar to tariffs that we did before. Export taxes work in the opposite direction. They, of course, reduce the volume of trade, push the domestic price down, again, cause a redistribution of income, which leads to a change in domestic economic welfare, but may raise the world price if it's a large country. And then that means, consequently, that there will also be a change in world economic or foreign economic welfare. In terms of high technology exports, the key here is that we have to have some sort of positive external benefits. So we view this as a market failure. The failure is essentially a problem of appropriability, that the high-tech firm is actually producing valuable goods and or services for which it is not being compensated. So from a social perspective, the private free market solution is too small in terms of output, which gives the government a role for using policy to expand production. It's always important whenever we're dealing with external costs or external benefits to figure out how do we measure these things. We don't have quantities, we don't have prices. It can be very, very difficult to actually measure these things. In this case, we also have measurement problems in terms of things like what exactly is a high-tech industry? Where do we draw the line between what's high-tech and what's not high-tech? And how do we end up actually using a government policy on the appropriate behavior? With strategic trade policy, we saw that there was generally a global duopoly to producers, and the competition was generally over who could get the monopoly profits. And what we saw was that a government policy will change the free market outcome. And that by changing the free market outcome, we can shift the monopoly profits from one country to another. In which case, of course, there can be welfare gains. But we also saw that it's possible, depending upon the actual outcome, for there to be welfare losses. So we've got all of that going on as well. Unfortunately for strategic trade theory, while it seems very interesting, the information requirement is quite severe, and it's unlikely that we can use it effectively in anything other than the most exceptional cases. With respect to developing countries, we talked about import substituting policies and export-oriented policies, both of which have effects in terms of how fast economies have grown. Not that there's necessarily any theoretical problems, but there can be practical problems in terms of how quickly we can develop a manufacturing sector, how efficient that will be, what that means in terms of economic growth and economic development. Multilateral and preferential trade agreements, we talked about free trade areas and customs unions, trade creation, trade diversion. That was fun. And then finally, we talked about trade, labor standards, and environmental standards over the last couple of days. Again, in most of the cases where we're talking about labor standards or environmental issues, once again, we're talking about some sort of market failure, where there's likely to be some sort of negative externality that would require or at least suggest that there's a role for government policy to play. Figuring out the right government policy and whether or not that government policy should actually be the subject of an international trade agreement as opposed to allowing that sovereign government to determine how to deal with the negative externality in their country is where a lot of the debate comes about. And it really comes down to, is this a domestic issue or is it an international issue? When countries are involved in international trade, there are lots of domestic policy effects that can also have international trade ramifications. So it's in some sense hard to separate purely domestic effects from purely international trade effects for countries that are involved in the globalization process. So we have to figure out exactly how we're going to narrow that scope. And therefore, what that suggests is, are the externalities something that justify actually using a trade barrier? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows what mea culpa means? I'm sorry? My fault. Okay. I have to apologize to all of you because I screwed up big time. So it turns out on this problem set that you turned in today that I gave you a piece of information that was incorrect. and a piece of information that I gave you that was incorrect was that, in fact, you do sum the export supply curves. So there's a long, involved, complicated story as to why it came out the way that it did that I won't bore you with. But to make good on this, what I have told the GSIs is the following. We will grade the multiple choice questions. And if you made a valiant attempt at the trade problem, at the free response question itself, you will get 35 points for that. So you will not be penalized because I messed up. So I have, however, written up a solution to the problem that I asked you to do, but told you to do incorrectly. And I will post that solution. I actually have to make a few adjustments to it. But I will post that solution so you can at least see how, what maybe a correct solution, I don't know whether it's correct, maybe what a correct solution actually looks like. Can I also include parts H, I, and J? No, because it doesn't work cleanly in this setup. Okay, so once again, I want to thank you all for a great semester. It's been a lot of fun for me. Thank you. Thank you. So my only excuse is at the end of the semester I go brain dead, and so I know I've made several mistakes here in the last couple of lectures, and I apologize for that, but I hope you've enjoyed the class. And again, I'll see you in about 2 weeks on the 17th, 105 Stanley, 7 p.m. So be there.